Hey, what's up you guys? It's Michael here. So the other day I was watching a video by Stephan about how much money you need to save at every age. And ironically, his video was created based on him watching a video by Andrei and Jikh on the exact same topic. However, since they're both US based, not much of the content was actually relevant for someone living in Australia, as we have completely different average salaries, our retirement accounts are different, and the student loan situation is also very different here as well. What it did show is that the US is a very unequal place, and Australia is not immune to this inequality as well. If anything, the wealth gap here is just as bad. The wealthiest 20% of Australians actually have a 63% share of the total Australian wealth, with an average net worth of $3.2 million. Compare this with the bottom 20% who only have a 1% share of the total Australian wealth, and an average net worth of just $35,000. This means that someone in that top 20% in Australia has on average 92 times more wealth than someone in that bottom 20%. So what we're going to do today is actually look into this Australian net worth by age brackets and see what average looks like in Australia and where you sit on that Australian net worth spectrum that I was just talking about, and what to do if you're slightly behind. And whilst it's never a good idea to compare with others when it comes to money, as everyone's situation is unique, it does at least give us some benchmarks to think about or goals to strive for if we are aiming to become financially independent. And at the very least, it will give you some specific actions to take if you do find that you are slightly behind your own personal finance goals. As the important thing to note here is that whether you're fresh out of school or well into your career, or you're still just forging your own path through life, it is really never too late to start saving or to check to see that you're heading in that right direction. And it's also never too late to smash that like button down below for the YouTube algorithm. Now, calculating your net worth really isn't that difficult. It's much easier than you probably think. All you need to do is tally up everything you own of value to calculate your total assets. And these will be things like all your non-financial assets, such as homes, their contents, land, even your car, for example. Plus the value of any businesses you might own personally, as well as any financial assets such as savings, shares, superannuation accounts, and any other investments that you might own. And then you just need to add up the value of any outstanding debts or loans to calculate your total liabilities, which may include things like a mortgage, for example, or any investment loans like a margin loan, any credit card debt, personal loans, car loans, and of course student loans, such as your HECS debt. Then all you need to do is subtract the total value of all these liabilities from the total value of all your assets, and then what's left is what you consider to be your net worth. And the total could actually result in a positive net worth or a negative net worth. And if you're in a negative net worth category, don't stress too much, it's okay. It's typical for people who are early in their careers to have a low or negative net worth, especially if you have student loans or you're a new homeowner, or you're really just starting to save for the future. So this is a nice little segue actually into our first age bracket that we're going to look at, which is at 20 years old. If you're 20 years old in Australia and have a $0 net worth, congratulations, you're doing better than most. I'm not kidding, it's actually pretty normal to not have any savings at this point in your life. And let's face it, if you are in university and you've paid for it using HECS, or I think it's called HELP now, so like most people, even if you're going to be working part-time, it's unlikely to be enough to pay off your entire university costs and living expenses. Hence, this is why the median net worth of a 20-year-old in Australia is negative $2,430. And note here, I'm using the median and not the mean, which is actually the value of someone in the 50th percentile. Median is actually a much better representation of average net worth, as the mean is completely blown out by the top percentiles who have super high net worths, which really drag up the entire mean. And that's what you typically use as an average. But because of this, it's actually not too useful to use in this situation, hence why we're going to be using the median as the average in this case. Now, this doesn't mean just because the average net worth of someone that's 20 is negative, doesn't mean that you can sit back and be okay with this. We actually want to be better than average, and it's actually the best time in your life to start building good financial habits that will allow you to be ahead of the pack. So my challenge to you is, if you're still in your 20s, make sure you've ticked off or in the process of ticking off the following things. First, reduce your expenses as much as possible. And this doesn't mean eating instant noodles every meal, but it does mean saving where possible when you do go and buy things. For example, make sure you're always using a cashback site like Cash Rewards or Shopback whenever you're shopping for things online. And make sure you're always shopping around for the best price. It's okay to buy things you need, but it's definitely not okay to unnecessarily pay 20% more just because you were too lazy to do a quick Google search. Secondly, avoid getting into any bad debt. And when I say bad debt here, I mean debt for anything that isn't providing you with a positive return on investment. So this excludes things like your student loans and home loans, but basically most other forms of debt you want to avoid at this point, like personal loans, car loans, and any credit card debt, for example. Next, if you weren't able to avoid getting into any of that bad debt, you need to just pay this down ASAP. And here's my reasoning with this one. When you invest your money in a broad index fund or in real estate, or most investments for that matter, on average, you would expect anywhere between a sort of 6 to 12% return on your money. And to get that type of return, you're going to be risking in some years where you'll actually end up losing some money, and that's completely normal. On the other hand, when you have high interest rate debt, just paying down the debt is like getting a guaranteed instantaneous return on your money at whatever the interest rate of the debt is. So going and paying off a 20% interest rate on a credit card balance, for example, is almost like getting an immediate guaranteed 20% return on your money with no risk whatsoever. So a basic rule of thumb here is if you're paying above sort of 5% interest rates, then it's probably best you just throw as much money at that debt to pay it down as quickly as possible, because you're going to get a similar return to what a good investment will generate after paying taxes on it anyway. So if you're 20 and you're not in any debt, the number one thing to do is start to set up an emergency fund, which is really just some money you set aside to only be used in case of, you guessed it, an emergency. And this is typically around 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, and I recommend keeping it in a completely separate high interest rate savings account. Personally, I have a completely separate bank account separate from my transaction and regular savings account that I have and never touch, and I just leave that to be my emergency fund. Now lastly, if you've already done all of these other things, this is now a great time if you're 20 to get started with learning how to invest and begin investing small amounts. I'd recommend checking out both micro investing apps as well as sort of passive ETFs to begin with. If you're interested in learning more about investing in ETFs specifically, I'll link my ETF beginner guide video above, which will provide a really solid outline of how to get started. This brings us to the next milestone, which is 30 years old. And it's actually insane to see how much lower the median value is compared to the mean value, because the mean net worth for 30-year-olds in Australia is actually $79,200. And that number is so skewed by the people in that top 10th percentile, and that really isn't a good representation of what the average 30-year-old is worth. Because if you look at the median net worth for 30-year-olds is actually $31,025, which is roughly half the average salary in Australia. Most money guides suggest that you should probably try and target to have a net worth at 30 equivalent to about 1 year of your salary, which, to be honest, seems like a pretty reasonable goal to target. More importantly though, if you are 30, you should aim to 1, have any high interest rate bad debt paid off at this point, and 2, be trying to get your savings rate as high as possible. And what I mean by savings rate is the proportion or the percentage of your income that you generate each month or each fortnight that you dedicate purely to investing in the stock market or some other investments, for example. Obviously, having a high salary is great, but what will actually be more impactful to growing your net worth over time is having a high savings rate. And in a survey done by money.com.au in 2020, they found that the average Australian is not doing a great job of saving at all, with over half of Aussies saving less than $250 a month. Now you might think this doesn't seem too bad at first glance, but when you dig a bit deeper, we find this is very, very low. If we look at ABS data in 2018 for median salary data, we find the average Australian is earning $1,110 a week, which comes out to $57K a year, and after tax, that works out to be $3,800 a month in the taxpayer's pocket. Now, if they're only saving $250 a month of that, that's a savings rate of only 6%, far from ideal. Now, I know in this video we are mostly talking about averages, but if you are someone who is looking to retire as early as possible, an achievable benchmark, even on an average wage, is to save around half of your income. That's a savings rate of 50%. And if we look at saving 50% of an average wage that we just talked about, which would come out to $1,900 a month versus the average of $250 a month from that survey, after 20 years compounded at an average return of 8% a year, the difference would be $1.1 million versus $147K. That's a huge difference of almost $1 million over 20 years. And what's really crazy is that's really achievable by pretty much anyone that is willing to just delay that gratification in order to achieve financial independence. And this will require you to obviously be regularly investing into the market. And the best way for most people to do this is going to be via a broad market, passive index ETF, which have historically returned 8 to 10% per annum over the long term. So make sure if you aren't already doing this at 30 that you begin getting into the habit of doing this. Finally, if you're earning over 90K a year, make sure to get private health cover by the time you are 31. Otherwise, you'll be hit with a 2% lifetime health cover loading added to your private health cover premium for every single year you haven't held hospital cover. This premium loading actually does eventually cap out at a whopping 70%, but since you can get private cover that is cheaper than your Medicare levy surcharge, there really is no reason that you should ever be paying the Medicare levy surcharge and hence that loading premium. Now moving on to 40 years old, reports from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, show that this is the time in your life when your income is actually at its highest level. You've had enough time to get experience in your chosen profession typically, and your wage will reflect this increased experience. This is why the average net worth at 40 has more than tripled since 30 and is $97,425. And since your income is at its highest in your 40s, this is the time to really grow your net worth. And the best way to do this, as I mentioned earlier, is by getting your savings rate as high as possible. Now, most of the guides suggest having around 3x your salary and net worth at this point. But I think if you're watching this video, even with a conservative saving and investment strategy, there really isn't any reason you shouldn't be able to have at least 5x, which would be around 300K if we're looking at an average salary. And let me show you why I think that's quite reasonable. If you've saved a modest $500 a month, only 13% of your after-tax income from that Australian average wage, starting from literally $0, after 20 years of passive investing at 8% return, you would have $294,510. And most of you will have started with more than $0 and be investing more than just 13% of your after-tax salary. So while that 300K looks like a lot, it's definitely attainable by the average Australian. So I think for this next point, while it's not for everyone, if you are interested in real estate, I would aim to have at least purchased a home by 40 as well. Since most mortgages are typically over 30 years, this will give you enough time to have it paid off. And whilst the percentage returns of real estate might not necessarily be better than stocks, and even if you think the best years of real estate investing are behind us now, there's definitely still some very good reasons to consider getting into real estate. The main one being the ability to get extremely large amounts of leverage at really low interest rates. This is why even though the percentage returns might not be better than stocks, the dollar returns typically will be. And secondly, there's also a lot of tax advantages to owning a home and things that are much harder to put a dollar value to, like not having to move around a lot and having that stability to be able to stay in one place. Now, if you like your career and aren't really interested in retiring early, this is actually a great time at 40 to start maxing your super contributions each year. Any amounts you contribute towards super up to the cap of 25K a year are actually only taxed at 15%. So for those of you with a high marginal tax rate, this can be a significant risk-free saving each year. And this really is a no-brainer if you don't plan on retiring early before your superannuation preservation age. And the preservation age is just the age at which you can access your superannuation funds. Regardless, probably the most important thing to do once you hit 40 is to start evaluating now whether you're on track to hit your retirement goals, whatever they are. And you can do this by really just looking at your average annual spend. For example, if you spend 40K a year, assuming a safe withdrawal rate of 4%, then you will need $1 million saved to last you indefinitely in retirement. And if you're someone who is a little bit more frugal and only spends 20K a year on living expenses, you'll only need 500K saved up to fund your retirement. This is actually really easy to calculate, and all you need to do is Get your number in terms of your living expenses and multiply it by 25 to figure out how much you need in retirement to survive indefinitely. Now, if you're 50 years old, the average net worth is $194,850. And this is when compound interest generally takes over, contributing more towards your net worth than your savings rate. For example, if you have 200K invested with an 8% return, in 1 year that will grow by 16K. And most people aren't saving or investing more than $16,000 in a single year. So 50 is the age that you really want to start contributing to your super and maxing those extra contributions, because it is a risk-free profit, like I said, and since you are so close actually now to being able to access your super, it really is just a no-brainer at this point. And to that same point, since you are close to your retirement age, you should also start thinking about moving your investments and any super allocations into more defensive assets like bonds and cash, for example. You also really want to be making sure that you don't have any outstanding bad debt remaining, like personal loans or car loans, and that you're also well on your way to having any good debt, like your mortgage, for example, paid off. Now, finally, if you're at 50 and you're not on track to hitting your retirement targets or goals, this is the time to start considering ways to lower your living expenses, cut down on spending, or potentially moving to a lower cost of living area. Ideally, you really want to be in a position in your 50s where if push comes to shove for whatever reason, you're able to leave your job and not be stressed about it at all, at least financially. At 60 years old, the average net worth for Australians is $290,975. And the strategy and recommendations are exactly the same for someone that was 50 years old. You need to be making sure you max your super contributions, pay down all debt, move investments to more conservative defensive allocations, and evaluate whether you are ready to retire or not, which, like I mentioned earlier, all you need to do is take your average annual spending and multiply it by 25, and that is how much you need invested to live off the return indefinitely. Now, it's really important not to stress too much if you're not hitting these averages and goals. Everyone's situation is completely different, and so are their retirement goals. And net worth certainly isn't the most important thing in the world. What's actually going to be more effective is learning to live and be happy with less money, as you most likely don't need to be spending as much as you probably do right now. Then from there, as long as you start taking action early with budgeting, taking advantage of compounding through investing, and living well below your means, if you can stay focused with this for actually not too long of a time in the grand scheme of things, sort of just even 15 to 20 years, you can easily be retired before 45, even on an average wage of $60,000 a year. This is definitely not out of reach for anyone, and it doesn't require to have a massive salary or to follow some guru's advice on how you can easily make thousands of dollars passively by just buying their ebook, for example. Now, with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up if you did, and to smash that subscribe button as well. And make sure you hit the notification bell to be notified when I do come out with new videos. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or queries, and otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.